Almost nobody's savings get wiped out by a bad decade. They get wiped out by a bad Tuesday. The car that won't start on the way to work. The scan that comes back with a spot on it. The email that says your role has been eliminated, effective immediately. One completely ordinary morning shows up slightly out of order, and a plan you spent years building comes apart in about a week. Here's the strange part. You already know this. You've watched it happen to other people your entire life. You've seen the fundraiser for a coworker's surgery. You've watched a friend get walked out of an office they gave a decade to. You've probably told someone else to get ready for exactly this. And yet, if it landed on you this month, there's a good chance it would find you with nothing set aside to soften the blow. Nothing. That's not laziness. It's not a math mistake. You can be smart, disciplined, good with money, and still be standing right on top of this trapdoor because the part of your brain that runs your finances is quietly, deeply certain that this will never actually be you. So today, the one thing that keeps you in the game when life goes sideways and why your own brain treats it as the very first thing to cut. Every year, the Federal Reserve asks American adults one blunt little question. Could you cover a surprise $400 expense with cash right now? Not a fortune, 400 bucks, a car battery, one trip to urgent care. In the most recent survey, 37% said no. 13% said they couldn't cover it anyway at all. Not with a credit card, not with a loan, not by asking someone for help. And that number has barely moved in years. This isn't a blip. It's a steady state. It gets bleaker the closer you look. A 2025 survey found nearly 1 in 4 Americans have zero emergency savings. Not a little, zero. Only 46%, fewer than half, could cover 3 months of expenses if the income stopped. And roughly 1 in 6 can't even pay all their bills in full in a normal month before any emergency shows up at all. So this isn't some fringe, rock bottom problem. For a huge slice of people, being one bad month from the edge is just the default setting. But here's what matters. These are not people who can't do arithmetic. Most of them know exactly what an emergency is. They could define emergency fund for you in one sentence. The gap was never knowledge. It's that something inside us keeps quietly betting the emergency belongs to someone else. Look under almost any financial plan and you'll find one quiet assumption holding the whole thing up. It assumes the paycheck keeps landing, on time, forever. It assumes the bills stay roughly where they are. It assumes the next 30 years will basically look like the last 30, just with bigger, rounder numbers. Every projection you've ever seen is a clean straight line, drawn confidently through a life that flat out refuses to move in straight lines. Because real life doesn't arrive on a schedule. It arrives in clumps. You get a stretch of quiet, uneventful years, and then 3 hard things land in a single season. The transmission goes. 2 weeks later, a parent gets sick, and right in the middle of it all, your hours get cut. None of those were in the spreadsheet. They never are. And when the plan finally breaks, it usually isn't because the strategy was wrong. The investments were fine, the budget was reasonable, the logic held. It breaks because the strategy was never given any room to be wrong for a little while. That room, the slack between everything's fine and everything's on fire, has a name. It's called margin. And almost nobody builds it in. So the real question isn't what should you invest in? It's this. Why do smart, careful, financially literate people leave out the exact thing that keeps everything else alive? There are 2 reasons, and both of them live inside your head. The first reason is one of the most reliable quirks in all of psychology. The neuroscientist Tali Sharot calls it the optimism bias. Here's the setup. Ask people to rate their own odds of a bad event, losing a job, getting seriously ill, going through a divorce, and they consistently guess lower than the real average for people like them. Not a few people. About 80% of us do this. Across countries, across ages, across genders. Most of us walk around quietly convinced that we, specifically, are the exception. Want to see how strong it is? Take marriage. In the Western world, roughly 4 in 10 marriages end in divorce. But ask newlyweds to estimate their own chances of splitting up, and the answer is basically 0. And here's the kicker. Even divorce lawyers, people who do this for a living, underestimate their own odds. Knowing the statistics cold doesn't switch the bias off. Or take business. Only about 1 in 3 new companies is still alive after 5 years. 33%. But ask the founders about their own odds and around 80% are sure they'll be the ones still standing. Half of those confident owners are about to be unpleasantly surprised. Now, And this is important. This bias is not stupidity. It's the same engine that lets you start the business, sign the mortgage, have the kid, plan a future at all. A little irrational hope is genuinely good for your motivation and even for your health. It's useful, but it comes with a bill. And the bill lands right here. The more certain you are that disaster belongs to other people, the less sense it makes to hold any money aside for it. The second reason is quieter and honestly a little eerie. Disaster researchers call it normalcy bias. Here's the idea: when something genuinely unusual starts happening, our very first instinct is not to act, it's to assume everything is still normal. People hear the fire alarm go off and finish their coffee first. They watch floodwater climb up the driveway and decide to give it one more hour. Your brain's default forecast for tomorrow is just today, copied and pasted. And most of the time, that's a fantastic bet. Tomorrow really does look like today. It works beautifully, right up until the one moment it doesn't. In money, normalcy bias shows up as one very specific, very seductive feeling that your emergency fund is just sitting there, doing nothing, while everything around it could be doing something. Watch how it actually plays out. Your industry starts to wobble. You see the layoff headlines, you hear it from people you know. A whole team disappears 2 floors up. And you tell yourself it'll probably blow over before it ever reaches your desk. So you don't cut back. You don't finally open the account. You don't start the cushion because technically nothing has actually happened to you yet. That's the trap. The trouble almost always announces itself first in headlines and hunches and quiet warnings. And it almost always gets politely ignored right up until it's standing at your desk with a cardboard box. And that feeling, my safety money is doing nothing, is the real enemy here because it's sort of true. Money set aside for emergencies earns almost nothing. It just sits there. And next to it, every other option looks smarter. The stock market, the down payment, the shiny upgrade, the can't miss opportunity your friend keeps texting you about at midnight. So slowly, the buffer stops feeling like protection. It starts to feel like a mistake. A dumb, cautious mistake you're choosing to make on purpose every single month. And this is exactly why so many financially literate people end up strangely fragile. Picture the person who's read all the books. They know their expense ratios. They hate the idea of lazy money, so they optimize. They sweep every idle dollar into something productive because to them, an idle dollar feels like a personal failure. Every account is working. Every dollar has a job. Nothing is just sitting. And what they've quietly built is a beautiful, gleaming machine with no slack anywhere in it. Perfectly efficient, genuinely impressive, and completely unable to survive a single thing going wrong. Because the moment one unexpected bill lands, there's no give in the system. So the whole tightly packed machine has to be ripped apart just to find $4,000. Now let's be fair and take the strongest counter argument head on, because it's a real one. If I just parked that money in stocks instead of a boring savings account, wouldn't I come out way ahead over 30 years? And you know what? On a spreadsheet, in a calm, straight line world, often, yes, cash does lose to the market over long stretches. That part is true. But here's what the spreadsheet leaves out: timing. The emergency doesn't wait for a convenient moment. So without a buffer, you're forced to sell your investments at whatever price the market happens to be that week. Very often the worst possible week when everything's already crashing. So the return you think you're giving up by holding cash isn't the real number. What margin actually buys is the power to not sell at the bottom, to not borrow at 24%, to not grab the first desperate job offer out of pure panic, to let your long-term money actually stay long-term. Its payoff never shows up as a nice green line on a chart. It shows up as all the disasters that quietly, invisibly, never happened to you. Because here's the thing about a financial shock. It is never just the number printed on the bill, it's what that bill forces you to do next. Without margin, a $4,000 problem does not cost $4,000. It costs the credit card interest when you can't pay it off. It costs the investments you're forced to dump at a terrible price. It costs the retirement account you crack open early, where you eat a penalty, a tax hit, and worst of all the future growth those dollars would have earned. That last one is the quiet killer. $4,000 pulled from retirement in your 30s isn't $4,000. Compounded over the decades, it's tens of thousands quietly deleted from your future self. And if you think this is only a story about people who were already struggling, let me introduce you to Leon Lederman. In 1988, Lederman won the Nobel Prize in Physics. This is a man who helped map the fundamental building blocks of the universe. He even coined the nickname for one of them. He took his prize money and bought a cabin. The gold medal itself basically sat on a shelf for 20 years. Then came a dementia diagnosis and the staggering open-ended cost of full-time care. So in 2015, to pay for that care, Leon Lederman auctioned off his Nobel medal. It sold for $765,000. Think about that. A man who reached the absolute summit of human achievement, undone, financially, by one diagnosis that no amount of genius could outthink. And he is not some freak exception. Medical trouble is one of the single most common threads in American bankruptcy. By one major study, close to two-thirds of all filings involve a medical cause. Researchers argue about the exact percentage, but not about the pattern. As one of those researchers bluntly put it, unless you're Bill Gates, you're one serious illness away from bankruptcy. And none of these shocks are rare, once-in-a-lifetime events. Bank account data from millions of real families shows the typical household's income swinging by about 36% from one month to the next, with a big swing, a real spike or a real drop, hitting in 5 months out of every 12. A 2026 survey found that 43% of Americans couldn't cover a $1,000 surprise out of savings. We call these things emergencies, which makes them sound exceptional and rare. Statistically, they're closer to weather. And there's a second cost of all this that almost nobody ever counts. Honestly, it might be the more brutal one. Two researchers, Sendhil Mullainathan and Eldar Shafir, set out to study what scarcity actually does to the human mind. And their finding is unsettling. Money pressure doesn't just drain your bank account, it drains your attention, your actual thinking power. Here's one of their studies. They grabbed shoppers at a mall and gave them a mental test. But first, half were asked to imagine a car repair. For one group, the repair cost $150. For the other, $1,500. The higher income shoppers, totally unaffected either way. They aced the test no matter the number. But the lower income shoppers, the ones for whom $1,500 is a genuine crisis, their scores cratered. Just being made to think about the expensive repair pulled their brainpower offline. Then the researchers went to India and tested sugarcane farmers who get paid once a year at harvest. Pour right before it, flush right after, same farmers, same tests. And they scored measurably higher after the money came in than before. Add it all up, and the effect of heavy financial stress looked like losing 13 IQ points, or pulling one full all-nighter. Not because these people were less capable, but because a big chunk of the mind gets permanently parked on the problem, running in the background all day. So here's a genuinely cruel twist. A shock without margin lands at the exact moment you most need calm, clear judgment. And the very first thing it does is take your judgment away. Margin isn't just protecting your bank balance, it's protecting the version of you who actually has to make the decisions. So how do you actually build margin, while carrying a brain that's convinced you'll never need it? 6 moves. 1. Stop calling it savings. Savings is just money waiting for a purpose, and your optimistic brain will happily, instantly invent one. A vacation. New shoes. That upgrade. So name it for its actual job instead. The buffer. The runway. The do not touch fund. It sounds like a silly little trick. It isn't. Money with a clear name and a clear job is dramatically harder to spend because now spending it feels like breaking a rule you set for yourself. 2. Put it somewhere slightly inconvenient, not locked away in something you'd have to sell, but also not sitting one thumb tap away in the same app as your everyday checking, a separate bank, ideally with no debit card attached. You're engineering a little friction between an impulse and the money, just enough that a real emergency is still easy to reach in a day, but a random 2 a.m. treat yourself urge runs into a speed bump and dies right there. 3. Automate it and start smaller than feels serious. Here's why most people never begin at all. They hear 3 to 6 months of expenses, they do the math, they decide it's impossible, and they quit before $1. So don't aim there yet. Aim at 1 month. Set up one automatic transfer the day after payday before you can even feel the money leave. 1 month of expenses is not the finish line, but it is the entire difference between an annoying week and a life-altering crisis. That first month is the biggest jump in resilience you will ever buy. 4. Size it to your actual life, not some generic rule. That same bank account research found families need roughly 6 weeks of take-home pay in easy-to-reach cash just to ride out a normal bad month. And about 2 in 3 families don't have it. So calibrate. If you've got a steady salary in a stable field, you can lean a little lighter. But if you're on commission, on contracts, on gig work, or your whole household leans on a single income, your life is bumpier and you need a noticeably bigger cushion. Match the buffer to the bumpiness. 5. Remember that margin isn't only cash. Cash is just one layer. Real margin also means health coverage, disability insurance, a skill that stays in demand even in a downturn, and people in your life who genuinely pick up the phone at midnight. Cash absorbs the small, frequent shocks, but the truly big ones, the six-figure ones, need protection you could never realistically save your way to. That's what insurance and community are for. 6. And this is the one people get emotionally wrong. When you finally have to use the buffer, that is not a failure. Draining it doesn't mean you messed up. It means it worked. That's the buffer doing the exact job you built it for. So use it without guilt and then quietly refill it. Because here's the real pattern. The people who stay wealthy aren't the ones who never get hit. They're the ones who could take the hit, absorb it, and keep moving without having to tear down everything else they built just to survive one bad month. So here's the single shift worth carrying out of this whole video. Margin is not money doing nothing. That's the illusion. Margin is money with one specific heroic job, making sure the rest of your plan survives contact with real life. And you need it because of everything we just covered. You will not out-earn the unexpected. It scales up right alongside your income. You cannot predict it. Remember, those business owners, 80% of them certain they'd be the ones still standing? The unexpected does not care how sure you feel, and you cannot outachieve it either. Remember Lederman, a Nobel Prize could not buy immunity from one bad diagnosis. So stop trying to be the person disaster skips over. Nobody gets to be that person. Instead, aim to be the person disaster doesn't take down. That one is actually available to you. Because the goal was never to build the most efficient, optimized plan on paper. The goal was to build one that's still standing in 30 years, with you still standing in it. And here's the quiet part to leave you with. The machinery we just watched, the optimism, the normalcy bias, the constant itch to optimize away your own slack. It does not stop at your emergency fund. That same wiring shapes how you borrow, how you spend, and how you panic when things go wrong. But that's a story for another day. For right now, the takeaway is simple. Don't try to get lucky. Build the margin. Be the one who's still standing when the bad Tuesday finally comes. Because it comes for everyone. If this one landed for you, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.